5 of the Delphi murders trial gets underway now in less than 20 minutes. One of the top questions I'm getting surrounds what people are calling the magic bullet. People are calling unspent bullet. It is one of the focuses of this case. The prosecutors claim that a bullet investigators found between murder victims Abby Williams and Libby German, they say they know that it came from a gun owned by the suspect Richard Allen. How would they know that? Is there science behind it? Well, Attorney Guy Relford joins us live this morning to answer some questions about the science, about that allegation. First, so good to see you.
You too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Let's talk about first. For the first time yesterday, I think in court we were finally hearing them refer to this as a cartridge. But throughout the last several years, even in months, we kept hearing unspent bullet.
Right.
A lot of people were criticizing me for saying, I'm only using what police and prosecutors are saying. First of all, is it a cartridge that you believe was on scene or an unspent bullet? What is it?
Yeah, the term unspent bullet is a very inaccurate term, but it's the one everyone's been using since it was discovered, allegedly, between the bodies of the girls. And if you walked into a gun store and said, I need to buy some bullets, they would know what you were talking about, but you're actually referring to the full cartridge. And I actually brought one here that's here on the table in front of us. That's a full cartridge, which actually has 4 components. It has a shell casing, usually made out of brass, in this case nickel-plated brass, and then the bullet is actually the projectile here that's coated in a copper alloy. But that's the bullet. That's the projectile that travels downrange and hits your target or whatever it is that you're shooting at. And then there's gunpowder inside the casing. And lastly, there's a primer, which is just a cup of chemical that ignites on impact, and that's what makes the gun fire. But the bullet technically is just the projectile. In this case, the copper-coated projectile at the very top of the cartridge. The whole thing with all 4 components is a cartridge.
Now we're hearing that this came from, according to the prosecutors, one came out of a gun that belonged to Richard Allen. First of all, yesterday we heard for the first time that there was a sound from that 45 seconds of Libby German that sounded like some kind of mechanical sound. Some people are saying that was probably a gun or something being cocked. What ways can a bullet come out of a gun? And then we're going to get to the part about how markings would be on it. Without it being fired, how would a bullet fall out of a gun?
Really, there's one way. And if we're talking about a semi-automatic firearm and a handgun, there's one way that really the cartridge can be removed from the chamber of the gun and ejected. And that's from operating the action of the gun, typically what we call racking the slide. The slide is the movable part on top of the frame of the gun. You pull that back, and there's something called an extractor. It's a little claw that hooks on to the rear edge. That's why it's shaped like this. The extractor
come out wide. You can see him.
It's a little claw that hooks onto this edge, and that pulls the round out of the chamber of the gun. And then there's a separate component called an ejector. This is the extractor that pulls it out. Then an ejector, a lot of times, is just a face or a stop. And when the case or the entire cartridge hits that, it tosses it out the ejection port. So that's how you get it out of the gun, is you operate the action of the gun, or you fire the gun, and then the bullet goes downrange and the casing is ejected.
So in this case, we know that didn't happen because it was all still together. So in about a minute left or less, what is the science behind being able to tell how you match that to whose gun?
It's really the same technology that's been around for a long time. It's called tool mark identification or tool mark technology. And what that is simply looking at the unique markings that a piece of metal, a harder metal like the steel of an extractor or an ejector, would make when it comes in contact with the soft brass casing of a round of ammunition or an empty shell casing if the gun was fired. So those harder pieces of metal hit the soft metal here on the casing, those leave a mark. And the technology says you can uniquely identify those, even as unique as fingerprints. There's a debate as to whether that's fully reliable science or not.
What do you think as an expert and as an attorney? Would you use the science or not use the science?
Well, it depends on whether the technology was correctly applied. That's really is. It's garbage in, garbage out. If you went through the appropriate number of iterations, the appropriate number of comparisons, you use the requisite level of magnification in your analysis. So The technology generally, I think you could say, is accepted within the scientific community of forensics, but was it applied correctly? That's where the rubber hits the road.
That's something that we're going to be hearing about in the days to come. Might have to have you come back to talk about what
Absolutely.
you think. Guy, thank you for coming in and explaining again the science behind that allegation. Fox59.com at 9 o'clock, jurors will be headed back in the courtroom, and so we're